Welcome back here at Goldberg. Today I'll be talking about the end of the trad era and what it might mean for you. Or as they say, it's over because it never actually began. I've noted in the past the resurgent interest in religion and conservative ides from other times usually can be tracked with the election of a Democratic president. It happened with Billy Boy Clinton, it happened with Obama, it certainly happened with Joe Biden. Oh, the end times are coming. You've got to get right with God and retreat to the countryside. Notably, I'm not hearing quite as much since Trump became president, and this is exactly what I predicted. But what is fascinating is to see the hamburgerification of history and politics, where many people are self proclaimed egg sperms on how things were or how they ought to be, and yet they don't seem to bother investigating. So, for many people, when they look at the Protestant Reformation, for Americans, they're thinking, well, Luther, he hammered his thesis on the door and they had died of worms. And that's the extent of it. In reality, the Reformation, and well before the official Reformation, there was considerable bloodletting. You can talk about in different parts of history. You have the Nestorians. I guess that was a little bit more towards the Middle East, but Valdonesians, Arians, Albigensians or Albigensians, Hussites, Huguenots, serious numbers of people lost their lives because of these squabbles. And you might say they weren't entirely religious, they were about political control, they were about economics. They happened nonetheless. In mainland Europe, in Ireland, who knows if Europe collectively has ever recovered from the population losses? But we're supposed to brush it and say, well, that was just a footnote in history. It does make you wonder if, in fact, you got this traditionalist Catholic regime that many of them want, would you not end up with sectarian conflict? In fact, it seems the internet is proof right there that people will embrace traditional perspectives and then they'll spend hours, years trying to hash out these theological debates from 400 or 500 years ago. Wow. I mean, imagine if you had abject political power, what that could in fact entail. This is true as well when it comes to Orthodoxy. So many a fellow chose not just Eastern Orthodoxy, but specifically the Russian variety because it was conservative and based. And this is, again, political signaling because they were, as far as Russia goes, they were banning gay stuff while we were having gay marriage enacted. So it was a useful contrast. By the way, people will deny this, but Dugin in the late 90s, early 2000s was outlining precisely what Russia would do to stir up issues in the West and advance their own interests. It's a brilliant campaign. It was very successful because most of the right wing in Europe and America, as far as the masses, and even much of the far left, the Jill Stein types, the Tulsi Gabbard versions, they believe the entire notion of Russia trying to subvert other countries is a DNC operation, a hoax. Doesn't exist, never has. And this is precisely what the Russians were trying to pull off. So you have to give them a pat on the back. It doesn't matter the evidence you show these people, they will insist, oh, you're shrill, you're a liberal, oh, you're hysterical. Even folks that are relatively intelligent, they will just carry water for Russians. In fact, it was discovered that many of these conservative alt media types who were presenting themselves as, oh, we're just doing analysis, we're fighting the establishment, they were getting money from Russia to express such opinions. Just like in the past, you had libertarians on Russia Today, and you had lefties like Tom Hartman on Russia Today. You have to sometimes follow the money, as difficult as it might seem. But returning to Orthodoxy specifically, incredibly violent consolidation in Russia. Most people don't know about this history. And look at Russia itself. So when the invasion of Ukraine occurred, you had these people going, oh, the Ukrainians and Poles have a completely irrational hatred of Russia. Really? Oh, that's news to many of folk. So the Soviet Union? Well, those weren't Russians. Yeah, I know the apologists try hard, but they never explain why so much of the Russian Imperial Army defected to the Care Bear communists. Isn't that interesting? How do you think that this motley band of radicals would have prosecuted the Russian Civil War if they didn't have the backing of people like Brusilov and the ranks? And you can see the vote totals of people that were in the Russian army when they were doing the Constituent Assembly election heavily towards the Bolsheviks, not even the Mensheviks. So this is a difficult part of history. But looking at Tsarism more broadly, it was always expansionist. Once they threw off the Mongols, it was always expansionist. At one point, I've seen a figure, they were advancing at 20,000 square miles a year. And their unfulfilled ambitions, of course, were to take over the Straits, Constantinople, and even India. This is not just Stalin. They wanted India. They failed because of British mischief in the region, because of the Muslim cells, and of course, it's a very harsh climate to advance soldiers, especially in that era, south such a long distance. At one point, there was even Napoleon wanted to form a grand alliance with the Russians against the Brits. So this idea that Russia was this nice conservative, traditional, non-interventionist power is utterly preposterous. It has no basis in reality, and it's repeated by essentially just clowns who don't understand history or are being deliberately ignorant to push a political agenda. You think of Ukraine, oh, it's the Care Bears trying to kill Christians. Well, I find this very interesting just to study because Zelensky is a Care Bear. There are Care Bears around him. There are Care Bear oligarchs, although he did put one of them in prison, or multiple actually, he tried to put in prison. But if you look at Care Bear land, Naftali Bennett tried to avoid antagonizing Putin, much as Netanyahu has done, and we have already discussed the very intricate criminal connections between those two countries. Putin has been pushing these memes like going, oh, my Jewish friends, they say that Zelensky is not a real Jew, he's not a real Care Bear, he's betrayed them, he's a Nazi. Lavrov, they're pushing SJW talking points. Putin, if you listen to him, he sounds kind of like one of those boomer neocons that will argue the Care Bears in the US by voting Democrat are selling out their own people. It's actually very interesting. And this goes to the question where they do this war in Ukraine. Now, whether you like Zelensky or not, I'm not a fan of him by any stretch. What is Russia doing? Russia demolished a bunch of these communities in eastern Ukraine, wiped out a bunch of people, and he's bringing in Central Asians, Chinese, he's bringing in Africans, probably going to bring in Indians eventually to replace these people. That's what Putin is doing. This is not a conspiracy. You can look it up. And on average, who's going to be more dysgenic? Like the Russian soldiers from Central Asia? Some of them legit, I saw a meme, one of them looked literally like an orc. Or, of course, these Muslim cells from Chechnya. These are who are going in and are going to just lay waste, whether you like it or not. So, yes, indeed, people are dying, but it's like it's easy to have all this pontificating when you've never faced that situation. If you're a Ukrainian, do you just give up and run away? Do you accept dominance by these Russians who are not actually Europeans, by the way, or do you resist? And this opens up another angle, which is the whole question of, oh, he's killed off all the men. All these guys are gone. The gender ratio is skewed. Well, I hate to tell you, but that is kind of your traditional societies that you want to LARP for. This idea of a 50-50 gender ratio, that's not how it works. You go back to that figure of what, 40-some% of men are believed to have reproduced. Well, yeah, because a lot were being killed. Plagues, invasions, even civil wars, internal conflicts, like we talked about, those religious ones earlier. So that does create a better environment for your average schmuck who survives. He has more pickings. Women, of course, don't live these comfy lives. They have to just settle for a man if they want to avoid dying. Even if you look at, I want to say as late as the 1700s, if not the 1800s in the UK, if you were arrested for a minor crime like theft, it's no suspended sentence, slap on the wrist, fine. No, you're going to end up being hung. And they had to do reform in the legal system because they said it was insane. Well, that also is culling predominantly men who would have otherwise reproduced. So this is how traditional societies tended to work. They were not these nice liberal democracies where you overlay conservative traditional values. In fact, the only example where people took power and eradicated women's rights, which these trad types will talk about. It's not like, we elect America first and we take away the 19th Amendment. No, it was the Taliban. The Taliban fought for what, 40 some years against the Soviets, against other factions, against the Americans to maintain this regime. How many Taliban died? How many Afghans died to achieve this? That's traditionalism, whether you like it or not. It's not, oh, we get to elect hard right Republicans who curtail women's rights. So I'm just trying to say, traditionalism is a meme, largely on the internet, which is fading because it was not built on anything serious. It's not built upon people that are willing to do what's necessary, sacrifice. It's just they want to align with something that's against the existing regime. Moving away from the geopolitical stuff, we have internal questions. I believe that Kanye West was a psyop from the very beginning because if you look at his career, he was a race hustler. He was, oh yeah, whites don't like blacks. They're always abusing blacks. And magically he becomes this advocate embraced by the Fuentesians because he's talking about the Care Bears. But what he's doing with the Care Bears, he's almost using it as a cheap commercial tactic. In a way, he is the ultimate Care Bear himself. He is generating up a bunch of attention by being controversial, and then he's taking the symbology of stuff like the Germans, which are considered one of the most perfect iterations of a pro-cream cheese entity, and he's turning into a cheap gimmick, selling T-shirts, probably predominantly to habaneros and brothers. We're being totally honest. He's doing this. He's spamming prawn on Twitter X. And then look here, he's dressed basically like a Roman Catholic priest, and he's walking around with a European woman who is in various stages of undress. Basically, his message to all you America First Fuentesian types is, see, I can do whatever I want to your women. I can use your woman as a piece of meat, and you're going to simp for me because, the Kevins. It just shows you, unfortunately, many of these folks have a low IQ. They have no strategic thinking whatsoever, and so ultimately they've been humiliated. And I think it was done deliberately. This guy's supposed to kind of reel them in, act like he's their dude. They say they want him to be president. Then it turns out that he's pushing basically all the stuff that the Care Bears are accused of. And what exactly is going on culturally speaking? Well, much of it is going to be downstream of Ellen to an extent. You saw this, but let's pause for a second because you had the tradwife meme, which got popular under Biden. Now, incidentally, I think it was created by a troon, but this was just an idea. We're rejecting the modern world. We're rejecting the degeneracy, the Stacy. We're going to go out, live in the country, have a preferably virginal female, but hopefully she still grooms herself, and have a bunch of kids and don't engage with the world. Cleave or cling to the church, to the trad values. Well, you started to see the insurrection against this by the establishment conservative types. And so if you remember, there was the wife jack meme that was after the election, and that was essentially, oh, you guys, you young right-wing males who are angry, you just don't understand women. You have to be thankful for this. I love when we're at the Christmas party and my wife, she passes gas, but I claim it as mine because we just love each other so much. That was the broad arguments. You had right-wing women on Twitter shortly thereafter attacking the idea of calling out body counts. Oh, that's offensive. You have no right to be subjecting women to that abuse. And indeed, Normie McDonald, types like that, these, I guess they're not really boomers, they're probably Gen Xers going, oh, it's not important. It's about trying to have the saving grace of Jesus Christ. Well, and that's legit, by the way, because you can come, and say, well, actually, it's just Protestants who accept people are degenerates. No, not necessarily. You have to remember, like, St. Augustine was a Reformed degenerate. Catholics in general, the guy from Church Militant who was getting into trouble a couple of months ago, wasn't he supposedly reformed homosexual who wasn't really reformed? Seraphim Rose, who all these Orthodox types cite, he was also a reformed homosexual as I understand it. So when the essence of your religion is you get saved through Jesus, but then you want to say, well, hold on, these people like Riley Reid, like Nala, they shouldn't be allowed to have a place in the church. They shouldn't be allowed to get married. They should actually have to atone for stuff, become a nun or whatever. If you say that, which I even just suggested that because I wanted to hold these people accountable, there were so many Christians rage pilling in the comment section over that because they said, "Oh, that's sacrilege to even make that as a idea." The point being, they are trying to eliminate the problem children within the right wing, the ones who actually want the genuine trad lifestyle. As much of that's being unrealistic, they are pushing it. And so Elon Musk, obviously, he's not getting the women in their prime. These, like Ashley girl, she was being banged out. She was a turbo thought. However, it's that notion. You have the resources, and now you can attain something. You have to start bailing out these women who are getting to be post-wall. Ellen, by the way, he has Asperger's by his own admission. If he were sent on a date, he would be on our Bumble as some nightmare if he wasn't Elon Musk. But it shows you if you have money and status, your personality, as in being fine tuned to what women want, that's irrelevant. So this is another BP in its own way. But that's not all. We have right wingers that are starting to claim young men should be willing to accept not just a 4 or 5 out of 10 who has a history or but is in shape. No, in reality, big girls. Here you have a guy, a Labrador skeptic. First, my wife was 115 pounds when we got married. 20 plus years, 2 children later, she's still beautiful. The implication was that she got much heavier, and he was suggesting 170-pound females could be on your radar. In his defense, if you're being realistic with the totality of options, even if you want to be very nice, guys in another post were going, well, 60 or 70% of women are ruined, but there's still a girl out there. You have to find her. You just gotta. That's not accounting for, and that's being very optimistic. That's far from Clary's suggestions. But let's say it's 40%. Let's say it's 30%. Well, you're not accounting for how many of those women are already taken or are not interested in the vast majority of men. You're not talking about intertribal competition, which is a huge issue in the United States. You're also not maybe considering guys like Ellen who have resources just vacuuming them up at a younger age. So the pickings aren't that great, and some are going to be left out. So in one sense, this Labrador skeptic is correct that you may not be able to have these standards, but it goes back to the same thing. You can't judge women. I should have mentioned earlier, Pat Stedman was reposting individuals going, it doesn't matter how many men she's slept with, it's how many times she's been disappointed in love. It's exactly what I'm saying. You can break it down in any form or fashion that you desire. This is going to be J.D. Vance. This is going to be the whole, we got to boost fertility rates. Now, the Republicans are trying to cut Medicaid, and it's with Medicaid, MAGA Mike Johnson was out there going, I mean, this is not for a 29-year-old couch potato who's playing Cyberpunk. This is for single moms. It is for single moms. A lot of births actually are covered by Medicaid, but even older people, some of them give up their assets to their kids so that they can have their insurance paid for when they get old, especially assisted living facilities. My grandmother didn't do that. She was Medicare slash private insurance, but she was paying out almost 50 grand a month to be in a home because she did not want to live with her kids. So it just goes to show you how this is. People think I'm being harsh, but you think of how much in the way of resources is flushed down the drain in like the last 5 years of your existence. It's kind of sad. So if they start cutting that, the Republicans, they cut off the support for these facilities, they cut off provision of insulin, of other drugs, people will start dying. So they want to cull the older populations, and then they also got to encourage you, young man, step right up, get yourself one of these females. So you're going to have to carry the load. I'll be like,
And no one else has a reformed trend out, I can promise you that.
I'll take that bet. Say, the simp and his assets for a tradwife.
No, assets are worth 2 tradwives.
This is going to happen, okay? You can just mark my words. This is the direction we're going in. So you're going to have to decide if you believe in the religious end of things, unless you want to just join a monastery. This is going to be it. Are you willing to take a fat girl? Are you willing to take a girl who's been ran through? You know, are you open to a Lily Phillips or a Bonnie Blue once she's had her fun and now she's found religion? And by the way, these Christian types, these trad types, most of them are going to be welcoming those girls on board when they do the pivot into, oh, now I'm a good conservative female. So are you open to it? Or are you going to keep your honor bright? Are you going to say, no, I won't accept that. I'll save the West. I'm going to the Philippines. Let's discuss.